Contact in the desert. How are you guys having a lot of fun out there? Great. Do yourselves a favor. Drink plenty of water because it is very dry out here. We have some of the most extraordinary speakers that are here this weekend, including Story Musgrave, the astronaut, Edgar Mitchell will be coming in by Skype, David Wilcock, Jim Mars, so many more. Even I'll be on the in the sanctuary here at 8 o'clock tonight, so you have a lot of fun. We have a big 3 days of exploration in extraterrestrials, the mystery schools, the esoteric sciences, the exploration of UFOs and how they apply to you. More importantly, today I'm really, really excited about Daniel Sheehan. I'm very privileged because I also am a member of the Romero Institute up there in Santa Cruz, California, and work with Daniel and Sarah Sheehan on the National Defense Authorization Act. You might have heard me talk about that the other night on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. He's going to be talking about freedom. He's going to be talking about law. He's going to be talking about disclosure. He is the preeminent lawyer who handled the Iran-Contra affair, the Pentagon Papers, the Karen Silkwood case, even the Watergate break-in. Law doesn't get any more exciting than that. You guys are going to experience the simply fantastic. Let's not wait any longer. Brace for impact, because this is Daniel Sheehan.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, my friends. Briefly, to context it, I'm going to be talking today primarily about the fact that the Roman Catholic Church, under the new Pope Francis, and the kind of ascendant new leadership of the Jesuit Order in the Catholic Church, has in fact issued a number of public statements recently calling upon the laity in the world to participate in a major new dialogue about the potential philosophical and theological implications of contact with the next. Am I okay? Am I staying alive here? Thank you. Let me give you a little bit of background. I graduated from Harvard College back in 1967. Of us here that were alive at that time, and the rest of you youngsters will bring you up to that. Can I keep this up a little bit so I'm hot, Tommy? So the bottom line is, I graduated in 1967, back just before that sort of halcyon year for the baby boomers, which was 1968, when all of those rather extraordinary things happened, when Lyndon Johnson withdrew from the Democratic nomination for the presidency. Bobby Kennedy announced and was running for the presidency. Bobby was killed, assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Huge riots broke out at the National Convention in Chicago. And ultimately, Richard Nixon ended up getting elected, which was the beginning of that strange period which led to the Watergate burglary and his resignation. And all of these kind of intense things were going on at that time. I went up from the college to the law school at Harvard Law School and became the co-founder of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review. So I was intimately involved in a lot of these activities that were going on at the time, as Robert has touched on. But a number of the things that began to cause me to have to look more deeply into a lot of the things that we had touched upon at Harvard College and at Harvard Law School led me back to Harvard Divinity School, where after a few years of practicing out in the world, where I had been legal counsel for the New York Times, establishing the right of the New York Times to publish the Pentagon Papers, as Robert mentioned. Also established the case in the United States Supreme Court that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources that you've heard so much about. And then went on to be at F. Lee Bailey's office when we represented James McCord, who was the former CIA wiretapping expert that was caught inside the Watergate Hotel. And because of the things that I learned during the course of those cases, I felt compelled to come back to Harvard and go to the divinity school to actually study about the underlying bases for modes of ethical reasoning. Because it became clear to me that people out in the world were pursuing entirely different modes of ethical reasoning, to put it politely. And that some people didn't care anything about the truth. Other people didn't even believe there was such a truth. Other people thought that whatever the truth was, they were in charge of concealing it and using it for their own personal power. And so the bottom line is I ended up going back to Harvard Divinity School, and because of that, I ended up being asked to become general counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., and was the co-director with Father William J. Davis of the National Office of Social Ministry. And we established a major alliance in Washington, D.C. Back in 1975 and 76 among all 54 of the major religious denominations in the United States to work on social justice issues. And the reason that I bring up that context is because that was where I was back in 1976 in November, when President Jimmy Carter was elected to the presidency. And as many of you know, probably most of you here know, that President Carter had seen a UFO when he was governor of Georgia. And so immediately after he was elected president in November of 1976, he called in to meet with him the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, George H.W. Bush. Tom, can you keep this thing, the sound on this thing, because it keeps waggling. The bottom line, he called George H.W. Bush to meet with him and ask George Bush to give him, as the newly elected president, access to all the information about UFOs and about extraterrestrial intelligence. George Bush announced to him that George Bush wanted to be left on as the CIA director for Carter. It wanted to become like J. Edgar Hoover had become at the FBI. He stayed on as the director of the FBI, whether it was a Republican or Democratic administration, a conservative or liberal administration. And George H.W. Bush announced that he wanted to be left on as the CIA director. But when President-elect Carter told him no, that he had his own person in mind to be his director of the CIA, George used to give information to him, saying that he was not in a position to need to know what that information was. So he said that if you want to get that information now, before you're inaugurated, you're going to have to go to the Congress and ask the House Committee on Science and Technology to contact the Congressional Research Service and get them to ask for it to be declassified so that you can have it. And because of his eagerness to get the information and didn't want to wait all the way through until January 21st to be inaugurated, he contacted the House of Representatives, got the Congressional Research Service, and they asked them to undertake an investigation, research, everything at the disposal of the Congressional Research Service to look into two particular questions. Number one is whether or not there existed a highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, sentient species in our galaxy or in the universe other than species. And secondly, whether or not one or more of these sightings of UFOs might possibly be actually a vehicle from an extraterrestrial civilization. That these were the two official questions put by the president-elect to the Congressional Research Service. Now, I was fortunate enough to be contacted and asked by Marcia Smith, who was the director of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service, if I, as legal counsel to the Jesuits, would in fact contact the library and see if the Vatican Library would allow me to have access to their classified sections so I could find out what it is that the Vatican knew about the issue of extraterrestrial and this issue of the UFO phenomenon. So Mark asked me to do this, so I contacted the director of the Vatican Library and wrote to him asking to be given permission to get access to this. I was a little taken aback by that. So what I did is I wrote him a second letter saying, I must not have made myself clear. That don't you realize who I am, basically. For the Jesuit office here in Washington, D.C. for the United States, and that we are, as you know, the largest gathering of Jesuits in the world. There are 10,000 Jesuits here in the United States. We have 10 provinces. Each other country in the world only has like one province. We have 10 provinces here. And he wrote a letter back and saying, thank you very much. I appreciate who you are, but the answer is no. And so I had to tell Marcia that I was disappointed in this. But the bottom line is this began a process of me looking into this more and more. And I was asked by the top 50 scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the SETI program in Pasadena. I was asked if I would come and deliver a 3-hour closed-door seminar to the top 50 scientists in SETI discussing the theological and philosophical implications of their actually establishing contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. So in preparation for that, I contacted Marcia again, and I said, Marcia, in order to prepare for this, I would like to be able to get access to some of the information that you're gathering for your study for the president. I would like, and she said, what would you like to have? And I said, I would like to have access to the classified sections of Project Blue Book. And she said, oh, I don't know about that. She said, I don't know if they're going to do that. And so I said, well, look, you never know unless you ask. So let's do it. So she contacted them, and much to her surprise and to my pleasure, they said yes. And so I got to get a look at the classified sections of the Project Blue Book and actually came across a set of photographs of a downed UFO vehicle that was clearly not the Roswell crash because it was winter and there was snow on the ground and this craft had hit and plowed through this field and left this big trench, and it was stuck in the side of an embankment that was all covered with snow, sticking up at like a 45-degree angle. And I recognized, suddenly I could see that there seemed to be some kind of symbols on the cone part, the dome of this UFO vehicle. And so I focused the little microfiche machine that I had so I could expand it and look at the symbols that were on this. And I took out a yellow pad because I wasn't allowed to take any notes on anything by them. And so I took out a yellow pad and opened it up. And on the inside back cardboard cover, I traced the symbols that were there. And then put it under my arm and fled, basically, from the room. And went and saw Father Bill Davis, who was my superior at the Jesuit headquarters, that following Monday morning, and showed it to him and said, look what I explained the picture that I had seen. And he opened up the drawer of his desk, and he took out an envelope and handed it to me. And it was a letter from his sister, Dodie, whose husband was air traffic controller at the airport in Seattle, Washington. And one of his best friends, who was a commercial airline pilot, had taken a photograph of a UFO out of the window of his airplane and had developed it. And here it was, this big craft sitting there. And he got so worried about this, he didn't know what to do about it, so he gave it to his best friend, who was the air traffic controller, and didn't report it to anybody. He said, look, there now, I've done something. I've given it to you. Her husband said, I don't know what to do with this. And so he asked Dodie to give it to her brother because he's a priest. Okay? And so that So Father Bill Davis gives this photograph to me and says, look, now you've got it, okay? So what I did is I made a presentation to the 54 major religious denominations, head office people in Washington, at the Washington Interreligious Staff Council, proposing, in light of what we had discovered, that we establish a task force to actually start to look into the theological and philosophical implications of the reality that there was this other extraterrestrial civilization. And there was this big dead silence. And Judy Stone, who was the head of in the National Council of Churches office at the time, said, and is there anything else anyone would like to raise for another issue? So he just completely ignored it, refused to do anything about it. So that was my original introduction to this whole affair. But in doing the research that I had done in order to present the seminar to the SETI scientists, I became more and more deeply interested in this whole issue. Had always been so, because as you probably realize, anybody with an intellectual level of an IQ above room temperature and any kind of spiritual or philosophical inquisitiveness has been intrigued by this particular subject for your entire life. Right? I mean, how could anybody not be, right? I mean, at least we all agree here in this huge gathering. So the bottom line is that later on, when I was contacted by Dr. John Mack, the chairman of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and asked to represent him when he was confronted by the Harvard faculty in 1994 with his having written a book that was called Abduction, Human Encounters with Extraterrestrials. He had written this book and was immediately called before a faculty committee of Harvard University, the faculty, and was confronted by the legal counsel for Harvard University, the dean of the medical school, and the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, Dr. John Relman, and was excoriated for having written such a book. And so John asked me to represent him because he couldn't quite tell what was going on there. So John and I went to meet with Lawrence Rockefeller and got Lawrence Rockefeller to agree to finance whatever type of demonstration we needed to make to the Harvard faculty to demonstrate to them the reality of the extraterrestrial civilization and the issue of the UFO phenomenon. At which point Harvard University freaked out, their hair caught on fire, and they decided, no, we don't want to, quote, we don't want to make a circus out of this hearing. And so that they backed off and left John alone. And so John set up a thing called the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research, the peer group at Harvard, to investigate not only the issue of extraterrestrial intelligence and the UFO phenomenon, but also an entire array of psychic phenomena that seems to be associated with this experience that people are having. And you're going to hear a lot about this. You've already heard a lot about it. One of the reasons why you're here this weekend, that there are these extraordinary phenomena that accompany these contact experiences. It started out with the reality that these vehicles that were clearly vehicles, a lot of people were able to see these. It wasn't just lights dancing in the sky somewhere. These were vehicles that people could see and actually touch some of them. And they could travel clearly faster than the speed of light. And they could turn at right angles, going at the speed of light. And they could do all these things that were totally phenomenal. Then they could disappear entirely, right midstream. They could go into mountains, through the side of the mountain. They could go underwater without reducing speed. People were astonished at these phenomena. And then people started talking about their direct, immediate experience with the beings. It was clear that the beings were communicating telepathically to the experiencers. They had communications with them. They discussed, where the beings were from, why they were here, what they were doing. But these beings used to do these strange things, like walk through walls, come walking into their bedroom through the wall and reach out and elevate them out of the bed, defying gravity, and all these kind of things they were doing. So John, in his project for extraordinary experience research at Harvard, decided they were going to investigate this full range of issues. And so they began to also explore the areas of psychic phenomenon, of telekinesis, the contact with spirits, extra-dimensional beings, indeed, numbers of people purporting that they can actually contact and communicate with people who have passed away, and know things, download information from them that absolutely nobody could possibly know if it weren't for them being in communication somehow with the deceased being. So John began that process, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to be legal counsel for the Project for Extraordinary Research. So I got to basically sit in these meetings. So I got to sit and meet with everybody. We were reaching out to people, all of the experts, colonels and generals in the military, FAA, Federal Aviation Agency investigators who investigated sightings, et cetera, psychiatrists, all kinds of people, to bring them in as experts because we had been preparing to actually present sort of a grand rounds to Harvard University about all of this. So I had the great good fortune to actually get to meet most of these people. I know and have met and spent many hours with virtually all of the major speakers who are here over this period of years. And I've met many, many, many experiencers of these different phenomena. And many people who have reported being specifically abducted and taken on board these crafts and had direct communications with these beings can physically describe them, can describe them psychologically, etc. And John and I, just before his unfortunate, untimely death, which was in fact an accident. I was on the phone with Danny, his son, within 2 hours of John having been killed in England. He was delivering a seminar on T.E. Lawrence, that John had won the Pulitzer Prize for writing the definitive psychobiography of T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, and was there at Oxford delivering a seminar and was struck by a car on his way out. Stepped into the street and looked the wrong way, like a true American, and got run down by a drunken taxi cab driver. So but at the time, just before that had happened, John and I were in the process of his wanting to set up another institute at Harvard that was called the Worldview Institute, because he came to understand his experience at Harvard as a fundamental clash of different worldviews. And that what was terrifying the faculty at Harvard University was the potential presentation of a completely alternative worldview to the fourth paradigm, scientific, logical, positivist, materially grounded reality that you can knock on like that, that is taught at Harvard University, at virtually all of their schools, with the minor exception of the Harvard Divinity School, that actually touches upon another numinous dimension. But in fact, it turns out to be basically in the job of training Episcopal prelates for the most part. So you don't get to really get a lot of creative work done there, but there are places where this is being done, and I got to meet a lot of those people. But very importantly, what I discovered is that the Jesuit Order inside the Catholic Church, which is the largest order inside the entire Catholic Church, the Catholic Church being the largest Christian denomination in Western civilization, has different orders, and virtually all of the priests and nuns and everybody are under the authority and jurisdiction of the Vatican, except for the Jesuits. The Jesuits are not under the control of the Vatican. They relate directly to the Pope and work only at the behest of the Pope. And so when I was asked to come on board, the Superior General of the Jesuits had been Pedro Arrupe. And Pedro Arrupe was a medical doctor, a surgeon, who had become a Jesuit back in the late 1920s in Spain, and had become a Jesuit and got up on the pulpit and started excoriating Franco and Hitler and Mussolini as fascists, that this was a terrible thing, and he was opposing them all. And so they were going to assassinate him. Franco issued orders to assassinate him. And fortunately, one of the three people that was assigned to assassinate him got feeling terribly guilty and went to confession. And told the priest, Fada, I got this horrible problem. I've been ordered to kill this priest. And so the priest was going like, who is this guy? And they said, oh, it's this guy, Pedro Arrupe. And so the priest went to his bishop and told him. And so the bishop removed Pedro Arrupe from Spain and put him in hiding in a monastery. And so he was in a monastery in Japan, which turned out to be a Zen monastery. And so he got into Zen meditating, doing 3 one-hour Zen sits a day, and actually got religion this way. And what happened? He got experiential religion, which turns out to be exactly what it was that St. Ignatius, who founded the Jesuits, had encountered. He'd encountered these kind of extraordinary experiences, these unitive, numinous experiences that led him into founding the order to begin with. So here we had Arrupe, and Arrupe was he was in the monastery on August 6th of 1945, when we dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, where his monastery was. And so he was up on the side of the mountain, and it blew down the place and knocked it in. He was knocked unconscious, and he told us, I sat talking to him about this, that he awoke, and the first thing he saw was the clock frozen in time on the wall that had been caved in. He saw the clock sitting there, and he knew that we had entered into a very different time period now as the human family, that we had crossed a line of discovering technology. We'd used our intellect to reach into the very heart of the nexus between mass and energy and had drawn out a sword. And so he was traumatized by this, and he actually led the people out from under the mushroom cloud. He was the mysterious medical doctor that's been written about that led the people out from under the mushroom cloud and brought them up to the mountain into his monastery to heal them up there. But because of this ecumenical work that he had done with the Zen Buddhists, he was invited in 1960 by Pope John the 23rd. Remember the last previous really good pope? Remember that guy? And he in fact decided he was going to have Vatican II in 1960, saying something is really messed up about the Catholic Church. We could probably get a vote on that. There had to be a massive reform of the Catholic Church. And so he convened Vatican II, and one of the committees that he established was on ecumenical relations with other religious communities. And he asked Pedro Arrupe to be the chair of that. And so he got to be good friends with John the 23rd and was chairing that committee on ecumenism when the superior general of the Jesuits died. And so the 100 provincials from around the world came into Rome at the same time that Vatican II was being convened. They came into Rome to sit in conclave to pick a new Jesuit superior general. And John the 23rd thought that this guy Arrupe was such a cool guy that he recommended that they pick him, which of course was the kiss of death. Because they're never going to, the Jesuit provincials, I can tell you, are never going to pick somebody that they think the Pope picked, because then they don't have any kind of independence at all. And so there wasn't any chance he was going to get elected, except for the fact that Cardinal Vio, who had been the Secretary of State under Pope Pius XII, the other really bad pope before Benedict that you remember, that he's the guy that had signed the Concordat with the Nazis. And in return had been given the Vatican state territory by Mussolini, and had basically participated in helping the Rat Line get all these German Nazis out of Germany and bring them to Argentina and Brazil and hide them out in the missions and everything else. So that what happened is that Cardinal Vio, who was the Secretary of State for Pius XII, was so upset when he heard that John the 23rd had recommended Pedro to be the superior general of the Jesuits, that he actually defied all the tradition and went to the conclave and started buttonholing these Jesuit provincials, saying, you can't vote for this Arrupe guy. He's a communist. He opposed Franco, they were saying. And they all went, really? And they after about the fourth or fifth guy that heard about this, they said, look, we better consider this guy again. And so they did, and they elected him, right? And so they all come back to the Jesuit, which is the great big headquarters next to the Basilica, where the Jesuit headquarters is. And they came in expecting to have kind of, drinks and hors d'oeuvres and sit around smoking and talking about with the new guy. And they came in, and like there was no furniture there. And there were no ashtrays, there was no alcohol, there was no food. All there were is 100 Zafu pillows, all sitting there, arrayed for them to come and sit down on. And here's Arrupe sitting on a Zafu pillow in a Zen meditation, waiting for them. And they all come in finally grumbling and saying, like, can't we vote again? Don't we get a... and they had to take off their shoes and sit on these little Zafu pillows. And so when they all got settled, he opened his eyes and he said, I have seen the end times. He said, and it is going to be essential for us, in order to save the human family, for us to take aggressive measures to disassemble the structural sources of injustice on this planet, both in the Western civilization and the Eastern civilization. And you're going to have to be committed to this. And the vast majority of you aren't qualified for this. You drink way too much alcohol, you smoke cigarettes, you don't take care of yourself. Half of you are having affairs with different people and undermining your credibility. So I'm going to have to replace a bunch of you. But there will come a point in time after I've replaced enough of you, I'm going to call you back to Rome, and we're going to have to deal with this. And it turns out that was the call that went out when I was a second-year student at the Harvard Divinity School studying comparative social ethics. And so I got asked by a Catholic priest there, Father Roger Couture, if I would agree to be interviewed to be legal counsel for the new Jesuit headquarters to help direct their social ministry office because of a lot of the work that I had done before that. And so I ended up getting to go there and get to meet Arrupe and get to meet all these people. And what I want to, introductory to my closing remarks here, the next 15 minutes, I want to tell you that what's getting ready to happen, and you don't know it yet, is that Francis is getting set to make an announcement on June 5th. So it's not something you're going to forget about. You can stick it on your fridge, that on June 5th, he's getting ready to issue a papal encyclical, which is the most powerful teaching device in the Catholic Church, a papal encyclical on global climate change and transnational corporate capitalism. And he is going to be condemning the capitalist system as inherently evil because it's driven by greed and avarice, and it inevitably drives the corporations who have no soul to actually expand and continue to engulf themselves in the resources of the planet until they're totally depleted. And that they'll just keep going and to destroy the whole world and destroy the climate of our planet and destroy our livelihood. And they said that the catastrophic dimensions of what it is that's in the offing, he said, that when the scientists at the Vatican have studied this whole thing, they recognize that the ice fields are melting, the polar ice caps are melting, and all that the Exxon Corporation can see is, oh, good, now we can drill in the Arctic, So he's getting set to issue this papal encyclical on June 5th, and he has now called upon the United Nations to allow him to go before the United Nations in September to the jointly assembled United Nations to make a global speech. And he has now asked for and just been granted the right to address the jointly assembled Congress of the United States, both the House and the Senate. He's going to be addressing them on this issue. And he has scheduled another date, which is important because it's December 8th, which is right in the middle of the Paris gatherings to discuss the potential imposition of mandatory and legally enforceable restrictions on the major corporations of being able to expel global greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And if, in fact, they do not accept these type of mandatory rulings, he on the 8th, which is 2 days before the end of that session that's going on from the 6th to the 11th of December, he has scheduled a major press conference at which, if they do not enter into this agreement, he is going to announce a Jubilee year, which is out of the ancient Jewish tradition, which cancels all debt on the planet. And I say this because what that will do is, of course, leave the major banks holding the bag, which is a bag full of money, which they print, basically, and that they put other people into debt. And it turns out that the basis of the value of their money is, in fact, your debt and the debt of our government that is borrowing money from the Federal Reserve. That the whole value of the dollar in the Western culture is petroleum and debt. And those are the two terrible things, he says. And so that he's hoping that this will constitute adequate pressure on the nation states to accept these mandatory limitations on the corporations because he's hanging this Damocles over them. Now, all of that is by way of introduction because I want to now focus on the fact that this same group of people, not just the Vatican, but now the Pope and the Jesuit Order has now issued this call. A call, they gathered the 30 scientists from around the world to come to the Vatican to study this issue of extraterrestrial intelligence. And because of the discovery of all of these new planets that they're discovering, the likelihood that we're going to encounter extraterrestrial intelligence in the very near future. And they want to get out ahead of this, and they want to position the Catholic Church now in the Jesuit Order are the primary theologians in the Catholic Church. That they want to place the Catholic Church and the Christian Church and the world Western civilization into a posture to be able to integrate this reality. Because they had such a difficult time the last time when it was established that our Earth didn't exist at the very center of the entire universe. There was this huge brouhaha went on throughout that whole period with Galileo and Copernicus and everything that you've heard about. And the fact of the matter is, what they did is they were able to successfully reconstruct a new paradigm after the Earth galaxy and universe-centered reality was set aside. What they did is they came up with a pyramid of the evolution of life, which places us at the absolute pinnacle. And that's in jeopardy now. Because the difficulty has been is that the scientific community, since the Enlightenment and throughout the Renaissance, has in fact replaced the core spiritual faculty with the intellect as the ultimate defining quality of our species. And therefore, they've said that the evolution of the intellect is that which actually carries with it the value of us as individual human beings and the value of us as a distinct species that makes us all important and none of the other life forms important except for as food or work animals for us. Okay? And so that whole bifurcation by means of the intellect of our connection to our planet and to our world is just a subfunction, as it turns out, of the bifurcation as a result of the evolution of our intellect from our entire sense of self from the universe. That whole sense of alienation that we feel is a direct product of the exercise of the intellect. Intellectus, you need to remember, comes from the Latin root. It says to be able to distinguish the difference between. That's what the intellect is all about. Being able to distinguish the difference between ourself as an entity and other entities, and to be able to rationally compute the relationship between them and figure out the algorithmic relationship between these entities so we can manipulate them. That is the whole function of the intellect. And you need to understand that relegare, the religious instinct, relegare, comes from the Latin root meaning to relink. To relink. And the fact is that what we're dealing with now is nothing less than attempting to come to a new and modern understanding of exactly what the spiritual experience is all about. Because the spiritual experience is a function of a completely different faculty than the intellect. It's an intuitive, unitive experience. And I want to share with you a lecture that I heard at Harvard University, one of the most important that I ever heard, and I heard a lot of them, that on December 20th of 1967, first year I was up at the law school, Dr. Crane Brinton, who was the chair of the Department of Intellectual History at Harvard University, was delivering his final lecture after having taught for 35 years at Harvard. It had been 50 years in the field of intellectual history. He was asked to address the issue of what the single most important intellectual insight of our human family was that he had ever encountered in all of his 50 years of study in this field of intellectual history. He came before the assembled crowd, and people came in from all around the world to be present for this lecture, and they had to move the lecture into Lowell Hall so it could handle everybody. And he gets up in front of the assembled crowd and he says, look, I've been asked to address this question of what the most important single intellectual insight of our entire human family is. And he says, it's actually easy. The greatest minds in our human family have all come to recognize that our human family is right on the very brink of its next step in evolution, and that we are in the process of evolving yet a sixth faculty that is different than seeing or hearing and touch and smell and taste. But in fact, it's like hearing. It's like seeing. It's an ability to directly and immediately experientially encounter the bonding phenomenon that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical cosmos into one unified, harmonious whole. And that by dint of that experience, like seeing light or hearing sound, you need to understand that the light is just an electromagnetic frequency. It's matter, it's energy moving in a particular pattern. And the eyes of life forms have evolved over billions of years as almost a tropic reaction to the existence of light, of this tropism process going on by means of which we've evolved eyeballs. You know, it's to think that in fact eyeballs just happen to evolve, and we ended up being lucky enough for there to be light around for us to see. Is a lot like thinking if you take, you know, every single bolt and nut of a 747 and spread it out in a field and hit it with enough tornadoes, one of them is going to build a 747. You know, and that ain't going to happen. And so that what they were saying is that in the same way that the life forms have evolved this complex system of hearing with the anvils and everything in the cilia in our ears, to be able to actually experientially encounter, to become one with the actual sound itself. So there's no reflective process. There's no thinking about it. There's no conscious decision that you're making to be able to see the light or hear the sound. The same thing is true of this faculty, that there's a faculty that is evolving that is able to directly and immediately experientially access this unitive phenomenon in the universe. And by means of that experience, that unitive experience, that an individual person, every woman and every man, is able to directly know what type of human conduct, individual or collective, is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of the universe. And that's what Crane Brinton said right in front of those people, all those people assembled on December 20th of 1967. And he turned to us and he said, and that's why so many of you young men here refused to go and fight in this Vietnam War. That's what he said. So that at root, there is a mode of ethical reasoning. There's a mode of ethical reasoning which is generic to this experience. And the point that I want to focus on here is that this is the quality. This is the quality that we're looking for in other sentient beings. It's not just their intellect. It's not just their ability to have a highly technologically developed civilization where they can have faster than light superluminal travel. We're looking for this faculty because that is the common faculty that if we can in fact find that and touch into that, that is the common bond that we have with these beings, no matter how technologically developed they are, no matter how intellectually developed they are, so that if we can get this to be understood by our people, that there's no reason to be afraid of these beings just because they may have another 2 million, 3 million, 1 billion additional years of evolution functioning for them. Because what we want to do is we want to continue to make the particular inquiries of them when we encounter them about these fundamental questions. These are the questions that, you know, whereas the military may want to know what kind of weapon systems they have, you know, or how they transform a downed UFO into a weapon, That old Sufi saying that when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. So that we've had this experience for the last 65 years, since Roswell, that the military, there's no doubt about the fact that the national security state is keeping all of this stuff secret because they want to figure out, one, how to develop weapons with this, and secondly, they want to figure out how to develop weapons against them because they're afraid of them, because they experience them as part of the ultimate other. They're all part of the ultimate other. And so that they think in dialectical terms of us and them, good guys and bad guys, black and white. They don't think integratively at all. And so that's the experience that we've all been encountering for these last years, since 1947. And so what I'm saying is that in light of the fact that the largest order of the largest single denomination in Western civilization has called upon the people to rise up and to begin this discussion among ourselves of what the philosophical and theological implications are of contact with an extraterrestrial civilization, we do not need to wait. We don't need to wait for the government of the United States to disclose this information to us, because they're not even looking for the right information. And we don't need to wait for the Catholic Church to tell us. We don't need to wait for the Jesuit Order to tell us. What we need to do is we need to mobilize ourselves, because if one thing was made clear by Vatican II, and that is it's the people who are in charge. It's not the people in the Vatican. It's not the people in the Pentagon. It's not the people in the Democratic or Republican Party. It's us. And it's our ability to demonstrate that we're capable of having this insight, of being able to have this insight and to focus on this faculty and exercise the faculty, strengthen the faculty, reach out with this faculty of intuition to establish communication with these extraterrestrial beings. Because the means of communication is fundamentally telepathic, which is a function of this other faculty. Okay? Now, that all having been said, that is in fact a sixth faculty, which is being added to our 5 faculties, the common faculties of hearing and seeing and touching, tasting and smelling, etc. This is the 6th faculty. And the question that we are going to have to be addressing continually is that 6th faculty enables us to have a direct, immediate experiential knowledge and experience of all of the matter in the physical universe, all the mass and energy. But the theological question that is posed is, what about what's outside of all that? What about the infinite and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness that enfolded into being the actual material universe? The actual mass and energy of the universe that makes up the matter of the universe. This great shape sitting in the middle of the void. How did it get here? And where's it going? How is the universe developing? Those are fundamental philosophical questions. The cosmological question as to the origins of the material universe. The ontological question as to how human consciousness and consciousness itself evolved out of apparently inert matter, and the epistemological question of what faculties do we have at our disposal by means of which we can possibly answer questions like that. These are all fundamental philosophical questions, but the answer to what lies beyond, whether or not there is an infinite and eternal sea of undifferentiated consciousness that actually at one point folded into being the condensation of consciousness into the original inchoate quantum field, and whether the inchoate quantum field that resides at the base of all matter is in fact conscious and therefore is responsive to our intentions. Because that's what's shocking everybody about quantum physics. What they've discovered is that if you break down matter into the atom and then into the electron and then into the muon and the meson, and you get all the way down, you eventually get to a point where you have an inchoate quantum field, and the inchoate quantum field blinks out of existence. But the fact is it blinks back into existence, into material manifestation, either as a wave of energy or a particle of mass, and then blinks out of existence again. And it does this at an absolute random manner, except when there is directed human intention, directed toward an inchoate quantum field And if one directs intention, human intention, to an inchoate quantum field that is manifesting and remanifesting in a form of mass or energy in a completely random pattern, it turns out that if you will that inchoate quantum field to manifest as a particle of mass, as distinct from a wave of energy, it will do so to a statistically significant degree. And that's all it takes. That's all it takes. It's just like saying, you know, how many verified UFO sightings do you have to have? One. You only have to have one in order to deal with this issue. You don't have to have 99% of them proven. You don't have to have 75%. You don't have to have 51% proven. All it takes is one of them. How many would you need to have? Right? How many times would you have to be brought on board on UFO in order to convince you that it's true? Okay? So what we're saying is that this discovery of quantum physics was made in 1923 by Max Planck and the others that were working on this, Schrödinger and the others. And the fact of the matter is we've crossed into a period now where it's clear that directed human intentionality, directed toward inchoate quantum realms of reality, actually have an effect upon manifesting material reality. And that's what we're going to have to come to grips with. And we as a human family are going to have to come to integrate that into our new worldview. We're going to have to be responsible for conducting our intentions in certain ways, because the question is going to still be posed to you is, pursuant to what particular mode of ethical reasoning are you going to be directing your intention toward the world? What is your reference system going to be? You know? And so these are fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves, but we need to ask ourselves this question, even though it's an onerous question, it's a difficult question, some of the issues are complex, but in closing, it reminds me that the task that we have in front of us, the kind of difficult task, is the task by means of which we will earn our way as the people into a position of meriting knowing what the ET people are about. Because we will, in fact, move into a position where we'll start to be able to appreciate it instead of being afraid of it. Okay? It's much like the little boy who used to collect butterflies. And he'd always wanted to have this one perfect specimen of a monarch butterfly. And he found a cocoon, a little cocoon of a monarch butterfly, and he brought it home and he put it in this little box with the cotton on it, and he got a light and he shone it on it, and he watched it all the time, and it kind of started developing. Eventually the monarch butterfly came out of the cocoon, started pulling itself out of the cocoon and pushing and shoving against the silken threads, and got all the way out except for one last silken thread was stressing, and he was pushing and pushing and pushing against that last silken thread. And the little boy finally said, "Look, I'm going to help it out." And he got a little shears and he cut the little silken final thread, and the butterfly came free. And it was an absolutely perfect specimen, except that it could never fly. Because, as it turns out, that struggle, that final struggle against that last silken thread, was what was necessary to build up the internal muscle structure that butterfly had to have to fly. This is the test before us now. This is the test before all of us as the lay people. It's not sitting around waiting for the government, not waiting for the church, not waiting for the Pope, not waiting for the Jesuits, not waiting for anyone, but doing this ourselves. Doing this ourselves, taking up the task ourselves, and discussing this among ourselves, and setting up study groups and talking groups, etc., using the internet, etc. The time has come. The time has come for us to push ourselves free, to stand up and to learn what these fundamental questions are, to address these questions and find the answers that will merit our becoming partners, our becoming full partners in the galactic civilization. And using these normative principles that we develop to turn down the war machine, to turn down the economic avarice and greed, to turn down the kind of pollution and contamination of our planet, to turn down the horrible health habits that we all have, to get ourselves bonded. And the fact is that there have been elements of our human family that for many, many eons have been telling us what the secret is. They've been telling us that this is a spiritual test, and that there are certain ways that you can strengthen this spiritual faculty. There are certain forms of meditation. There are certain forms of diet. There are certain forms of practices that you can undertake, to strengthen this. And this is a spiritual quest. And it's a spiritual quest that will establish, in fact, a new form of religion in our human family. And this has been hinted at by people who have had this UFO experience. They view it as a spiritual experience, but they don't know why. Okay? But we can help on this. And that's why we gather here on weekends like this to ask the questions, to share our insights on this, to have these discussions, and to gather more information. So that's what I have to say given 1 hour. Thank you.